Welcome everybody. I'm just watching the figures going up for people who are entering the Zoom room. So I'm going to give it a moment as we let people in. Okay, so welcome back everyone, and thanks for coming. You're very, very welcome. We now get to what I think I can call the most interesting bit of our AGM, which is our expert panel on the Commission for a Gender Equal Economy, which has been a bit of a flagship project for us. We have to say huge thanks to our chair, Professor Diane Nelson, and enormous thanks to Marion Sharples, who's here to talk to us this afternoon about the report and the recommendations in it. It's a fabulous report, and I can say that because I wasn't involved in doing it. I wasn't part of the commission group. We got together a fantastic group of experts, and you're going to hear some of that expertise this afternoon, ably chaired by Rebecca Omanira Oyekanmi, who said to me a minute ago that this is a nice change from looking after a new baby. And I think everyone else on here, well, certainly speaking for myself, I feel just zoomed out. And the idea of another Zoom is kind of, so it's lovely to have somebody who who sees it as a nice break from childcare. So Rebecca, over to you. And we really look forward to hearing what you all have to say. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Janet. Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for joining this discussion. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the Commission on a Gender Equal Economy, and over the next hour we'll be thinking and talking about how we can put the Commission's final report and recommendations into practice. So you probably all know the report was launched last month on the 30th of September. It's the final report with a great title, Creating a Caring Economy, a Call to Action. And it's a timely, in my view, a timely, radical piece of work. Timely because while the contents and background research of the report has a solid foundation based on years and years of feminist thinking on well-being, sustainability and gender equality, the ideas discussed in the report are necessary right at this very moment. We all know by now that the pandemic has intensified existing inequalities across the UK, accelerated the impact of austerity policies on us all, and exposed the failings of rampant, unchecked, uncaring, exploitative capitalism. But what's lacking in the public discourse is fresh ideas, because what the pandemic has also shown is a lack of imagination and courage among the current crop of politicians who run the country and those who advise them. So that's why it's so exciting to see this report published right now. The Gender Commission's radical, bold proposals are much needed, and the report and its supplementary documents offer some hope and possibility. And the way the report has been rolled out through a series of public conversations in different formats widens access to the discussion and offers an opportunity for a rich and exciting conversation about how to fix the state we're in and practical proposals for a caring future. So today we're going to explore and think about the next steps, the role of business and unions, and how we might take things forward. So to kick us off, Marion Sharples, the project manager for the Commission on a Gender Equal Economy, will do a presentation. That will be followed by Sarah Veal, who is the former head of the Equality and Employment Rights Department at the Trades Union Congress, and was also a commissioner as part of the Commission on a Gender Equal Economy, and Eugenia Migalori, Principal Policy Advisor at the Confederation of British Industry and also a commissioner. So each of those experts will speak for 10 minutes, and then you'll have an opportunity for questions after that. Please do write down your questions as we go along. There's a little chat box where you can write your questions. At the end of the presentations, I'll then read out the questions, and the commissioners and the experts will answer them as best they can. Just note that the webinar is being recorded, and if you also want to continue the conversation or joining the chat on Twitter, we have a hashtag which is WBG Commission, all one word. So I will stop talking now and hand over to Marion. Thanks, Marion.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And Hannah, our colleague, is also going to magically display some slides. Yes, exactly, magically like that. Fantastic, thank you so much, Hannah. So what I'm going to do is, just in my few minutes that I've got to speak, I'm just going to give an overview of the Commission itself, the vision of a caring economy which it developed, the 8 steps to a caring economy that the Commission developed, and kind of give a snapshot of where progress is already underway and public support for these changes. So if we go to the next slide, Hannah, this is kind of just a little summary of the Commission itself. So we launched in spring 2019. There were 17 commissioners. You can see their headshots there and their names, and their full details are on our website. And the Commission spanned civil society, academia, business, unions, journalists. So we really had a kind of a panel of experts from different sectors, which was really crucial to the essence of the Commission. We commissioned 26 expert briefing papers, and we received over 100 submissions of evidence over the course of the Commission. And a really important part of the Commission's work was its 4 nations approach. So we travelled to Cardiff, Glasgow, Belfast, Sheffield, as well as having meetings in London. And we met there with local politicians, policymakers, civil servants, as well as representatives from women's and equalities organisations in each of the nations, which was extremely insightful. Another crucial part of the Commission's work was its intersectional approach, meaning that it considered multiple oppressions alongside and intersecting with gender inequality, to ensure that its recommendations speak to the complexities of human lives and the realities of intersecting inequalities. So if we go to the next slide, this captures some of the voices from the front line, some of the things that the people that we met with in the different nations sessions that we held. You can see some of the issues that they raised, so around childcare, social security, and transport. And the issues raised at these sessions really fed into the final report of the Commission. And the next slide kind of shows the vision of the Commission. It's a caring economy, as the title of the report indicates, a caring economy which achieves gender equality, but also sustainability and well-being simultaneously. So that's quite abstract, I think. So the next slide, we have a worked example of that to make it come to life somewhat. So looking at the example of investment in paid care services, we can see that this improves well-being because it meets people's needs. Gender equality, because it creates more jobs, especially more jobs for women, closing the gender employment gap. And it is sustainable because investing in care is 3 times less polluting per job created overall than the equivalent investment in construction. And it's been really interesting to see that in the pickup of the report since we launched a couple of weeks ago. These two, the latter 2 bullet points here, have really come out strongly in the media coverage that we got and what people have been sharing and picking up. So it's been really interesting to see how those have resonated with people. The next slide kind of gives a little bit more detail about the vision of a caring economy. So it's care is unsurprisingly central to a caring economy. It's about prioritising care of one another and also the environment in which we live, making sure that everybody has time to care as well as time free from care, making sure that unpaid care is equally shared. And of course, paid care services are crucial, as we saw on the previous slide, but a caring economy goes beyond this to broader concerns across the whole economy. And there's more on this on the next slide. So what we really wanted to show was that a caring economy does span the entirety of the economy, and it's not limited to the care sector itself, the paid care sector itself. So it really ranges from reconceptualizing what we mean by the economy, reorientating our fiscal and monetary policy towards a caring economy, looking at the worlds of paid and unpaid work and how they need to be transformed, social security, public services, taxation, right up to the global economic and trade systems. So it really does span a lot of areas. And we divided the report into these 8 steps with the intention of making that seem more feasible, more achievable, looking at the different areas that need to be covered. And each of these steps has a set of recommendations which apply to businesses, to governments, both UK and national governments. And yeah, I would urge you to have a look at the recommendations if you haven't already. On the next slide, then, we can see that progress on many of these areas is already underway, which is encouraging. For example, relating to step 1, which is about re-envisioning what we mean by the economy, we can see that some governments have already adopted a well-being approach to economic policy. Scotland, Wales, New Zealand and Iceland have formed the group of well-being economy governments, and each of those governments has developed monitoring frameworks to monitor well-being. Looking at step 2, which is about investment in social and physical infrastructure, we can look at the example of housing, where projects such as Goldsmith Street, which is an award-winning social housing project on the outskirts of Norwich, are kind of paving the way and showing us how things can be done differently. And the houses on that project are ecologically designed and very well insulated, so that they have very low heating bills. And another area of investment in social infrastructure, we can look at care, for example, looking at Denmark, which has about 11% of its population working in care, which is about double the proportion in the UK. And in Denmark, care workers are paid about 73% of what qualified nurses and teachers are paid, whereas in the UK, it's about 50% of what nurses and teachers earn. Relating to step 3 then, which is paid and unpaid work, we drew on the example of Aviva, the insurance company, where all new parents are entitled to up to 26 weeks leave, parental leave at full pay, plus another 6 months of unpaid leave available too. And it's really interesting to see the impact of that. The average length of paternity leave taken now is 22 weeks, compared with an average of 2 weeks before the policy was brought in. And then relating to step 4, the last example here, we can, which is about social security and creating a caring social security system. We can look to Scotland, where in 2018 the Scottish Government increased carers allowance by 13%, meaning that carers in Scotland receive around £450 additional compared to carers in the rest of the UK. And this year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Scottish Government made an automatic additional payment to those receiving carers allowance to provide further support to carers during the pandemic. Of course, this doesn't go far enough, but it is an indication of progress and an indication of how things can be different. And then the next slide, continuing the optimism, seeing how things can be done differently already. This is another slide which gives us potential to push this case, I think. At the same time as launching the report, we conducted polling, which shows really strong public support for some of these urgent changes. And some of the stats here are on the slide. I didn't want to overload you with stats, but there are a few key ones here, and there are some more ones in the report itself. And really, they're grouped into 3 categories here. So the turquoise box shows support for an increased focus on well-being and getting a better balance in life. In the yellow box, we can see strong levels of public support for gender equality, particularly in encouraging men to provide more care. And interestingly, this was the case among both women and men, with really high levels of support among men aged 18 to 44. Men in that age group were around three quarters of men in that age group agreed that the government should encourage and financially support men to provide more care. And in the blue box then at the bottom, we can see public support for specific policy proposals that the Commission report makes. For example, around investing in social infrastructure, such as social care, health and education, and making social care based on needs as opposed to on wealth. So I think, yeah, these statistics here are really crucial for making the case for a caring economy. And I think looking back at these few slides that I've shared with you, I think it's clear that people want to see these changes. It makes economic sense looking at that, the high returns to investment in care, which we saw earlier, and which I was saying has been picked up on a lot since launch. And on the previous slide, we saw how progress is already underway towards our vision of a caring economy, which we can definitely learn from and build on. So on the next slide, my last slide here, I've just put the link to the Commission report. I think Hannah's also put it in the chat, so you can check it out there as well. That's my email address if anybody has any further questions about the report, and those are our two hashtags. But yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks, Marion. I think someone wants to know, Jackie would like to know if it's possible to share copies of the slides. And
yeah, that's fine. That's no problem.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll hand over to Sarah.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Rebecca, and good evening, everybody. I'm just going to apologise for sometimes looking down. I know that's slightly rude when you're giving a talk, but I've just got a little aid memoir here to make sure I cover everything that I committed myself to cover a little earlier on. So do forgive me for that. First of all, really to say what an exciting time I've had being on the Commission. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've learned loads, and I know this isn't all about me, but I have. And I think that's because we've been going through an iterative process and talking to lots and lots of other organisations. And I think in the process of getting all the evidence that we need and talking to groups of people, we've actually disseminated ideas that we've been having. So it's been very much a two-way process. And it's obviously not over at all. What we have to do now is make sure we land this in the right places. And I'm very anxious to ensure that we do that with the trade unions and in the workplace, which obviously is absolutely hugely significant in terms of the economy and very much part of it. What I thought I'd do in my time here with you this evening, as well as asking questions obviously, is just to say a few words about where trade unions are in the economy and in the workplace. And people who are listening to this who may well be trade unionists, forgive me if you know this already, but hopefully it's quite useful just to reiterate the role that trade unions have. First of all, really, where are trade unions today? I mean, they're predominantly in the large companies area, in public and private sectors. And I suppose a typical example of where a trade union is recognised, and I'll come on to that term in a second, would be somewhere like Royal Mail, which has had a long traditional involvement of trade unions with the company and in the company. The word recognition is slightly odd. A lot of trade union employer terminology sounds colloquial, but actually it's a specific legal term, and it's where a company decides to talk about issues such as pay and working conditions with one or two possibly trade unions, and the two parties will work together to come to some sort of determination of what pay increases will be for the following year and so on. And that's obviously, that gives trade unions a very important role in those companies that recognise them. It's probably also fair to say, and people will trip me up if I don't say this, that the trade union presence in smaller companies is much, much, much less. And trade unions also, I think, are struggling, to be absolutely honest, to get coverage in the fast growing parts of the economy where you have a lot of self-employment and where people are often working in one or two jobs at the same time. They're doing consultancy, they're on non-contractual arrangements often with an employer. They're supplying work almost on a daily basis. That's a whole area of the economy where unions, I know, are trying very hard to push out, but it requires a very different sort of model of trade unionism. But that's not to say that where there isn't union recognition or union direct presence, that unions don't have an influence because of their role in the wider economy. And just for example, you'll see that during the recent discussions with the government about the furlough scheme, the TUC has been very much an integral part of that with the CBI, and even a government which perhaps wouldn't naturally go to trade unions for opinions and help and involvement has seen that there needs to be a collective workers' voice in all this, and that the place to go for that in the UK in a democracy is to the freely organised trade union movement. So what do trade unions do when they're recognised? What is it they cover in the workplace? Well, I've mentioned pay, and that's probably the most obvious area. But they're also very much involved in discussions about how the workplace is organised and about issues like health and safety. And that's where the work our commission has done comes into play very much, because what unions will do typically is to take an individual issue, for example, sex discrimination, and instead of it just residing with one individual who may be going through a complaints procedure and into an employment tribunal, it will actually look at why the case has arisen and what sort of systemic issues there may be in that workplace to do with sexism. And it's often to do with the way the workplace is organised. Obviously, it can be a personal and individualised experience, but it's often about the way in which things are happening. And it comes in particularly where you get flexible working. And sometimes someone will feel they've been unfairly denied the opportunity to work more flexibly, or that the company hasn't really got a proper system through which individual employees can say, well, actually, I have children of school age, and it would be much better for me and for the company if I could work hours that allow me to pick up my children and to be flexible. So you can see that individual cases where there's a trade union often are collectivised, and that's very good because it means the employers look at systemic issues rather. And perhaps the other obvious example is equal pay, where it's very unusual for an equal pay case really to be about one woman. It can be, but much more likely it's about a grading system that has unintentionally meant that women are not doing as well as men in terms of pay, promotion, training, and so on, job evaluation, etc. So those are all the kinds of areas that unions can and do cover that have particular relevance to the work that we're doing on the Commission. It's also probably worth saying that unions still kind of lead the way in terms of sectoral pay. You hear people talking about the going rate for the job, particularly in areas like retail. And what tends to happen there is that the pay determination can be set by unionised companies, Asda, Tesco, for example, and would then very much be followed by unions, by companies that don't actually recognise unions. So the impact of unions, the influence of unions, is often much, much, much wider than their actual direct representation in individual workplaces. So I think that's quite important to remember. And then, because I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, different political parties, different governments have different attitudes to trade unions. And I think I've been personally very interested in discussions that have been going on in the Labour Party, and I think in other parties as well, actually, about how you can do pay and workplace issues much more differently, that's bad grammar, and looking at things like the possibility of sectoral forums where companies within a particular sector would agree to come together to talk to the unions involved and to decide, sort of with representation from the workforce, what would be the best rate for particular types of job. And again, I think that's where we can work with unions to assess again what the value is of the contribution of women in the workplace. I've always been really struck by the fact that job evaluation often doesn't take into account all the serious issues about caring responsibilities and other things like that. And that's why you end up in a situation where plumbers, for example, who are predominantly male, are paid 4 times as much as people who care for children. Now, again, if you ask someone in the street, what's the most important thing in life? Bringing up children and making sure they have a good background, a good education, a good home life, or mending taps. And I don't want to diminish the role of plumbing, but I think people would say, actually, I think looking after children and giving them a good start in life is a much more important contribution to society. So why is it that pay and status don't reflect that in reality? So those are the kind of things that have been really kind of exciting me, and are looking back even to the role of the former wages councils that would assist in ensuring that wages reflected people's contribution much more accurately. I think I've probably gone on for my 10 minutes now. I'm very happy to pick up more points and questions, but I just wanted to emphasise the importance of the collectivisation of the workforce, and the way that women have been able to advance enormously in areas where they've been able to have a collective voice and haven't had to try and do things on their own. So things like equal pay, nursery provision, and so on have all been very much led by trade unions with progressive employers who've accepted the importance of those sorts of things. So obviously I would hope the trade union movement would grow, but I certainly hope that we continue to work with the TUC and all the other unions in pushing this report out there and making sure it has traction. So thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. That was great. I'll just hand over to Eugenia now. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. And yes, we were saying with Marion that we had already a session today about this. So sorry if I'm repeating a bit the things that I already said. I think we have a different audience anyway. I think I've been reflecting about this and the role of employers here. And I think a couple of things. It has been a great pleasure and a great honor to be in this commission. I think it's the fact that we sort of visited the 4 nations and sort of have the opportunity to talk to campaigners, policymakers, politicians, MPs, and to understand the reality, the different challenges that each nation has. It was very, very important and very interesting. And actually, I think it gives a very important feature of this report that is looking at different sort of approaches for the different nations, but actually coming with a holistic approach to this caring economy concept. And I think the role of employers here is really, really important. And I sometimes I sort of do struggle a bit because, when I talk to employers or when we sort of write consultation responses to the government, we have been supporting a lot of the things that we say in this report. I don't know, I'm just thinking about a consultation last year on parental leave, for instance. The CBI was very vocal on that, and we said that we would like to see a different parental leave and parental pay system in the UK, because it's the one that we have now, it doesn't really work for all of us. And we've seen a lot of employers actually equalizing paid leave and parental leave and the level of pay for mothers and fathers. So actually, I was thinking all different things that we have been calling for. We actually, this morning, you probably seen in the papers, we wrote a letter to the Prime Minister asking the government to introduce ethnicity pay gap reporting alongside the TUC. So that was this morning, for instance. So we have been asking the government to do that for nearly 2 years, I think now. But also the creation of a single enforcement body. We need a single enforcement body to look at the sort of labor market sort of framework to support workers in sort of making sure their rights are are guaranteed. So we have been asking for that as well. I did the response to the government around one-sided flexibility. You might remember that one. That was a year and a half ago. And we've been asking the government to introduce a right to reasonable notice of work schedule, but also a compensation for shift cancellation. It is not fine if you cancel a shift and you don't pay for that. So we've been saying that, and we are in the same page on that. But again, the government hasn't responded to that. So that's another conversation. But I'm thinking of flexible working as well. We've been asking the government to sort of introduce flexible working requests as a day one right. Now you have to sort of be in a job for 26 weeks. Okay, why is that? Why 26? It's like, who decided 26? So we're asking that to the government. We're asking the government to introduce mandatory action plans to gender pay gap reporting. It's not part of the legislation now. You have to just report the gender pay gap, which is important. But actually, I would say, the main thing there is actually to explain as an employer, what are you going to do to close the gender pay gap? So action plans must be mandatory in the gender pay gap legislation. I don't know. So I think it's interesting because we've been asking the government to do more in this space, and I think a lot of employers, or at least CBI members, are very aware of the importance of people in this agenda and how actually people and your staff will be the ones sort of bringing you out of this crisis. So that I think they are aware of that, and I think the case for for diversity and inclusion, for including more women on boards, for instance, or having better diversity of thought in a company. I think that case is actually, quite clear. But I guess now we have the report out there. As Sarah said, the CBI has been working with the TUC to introduce the furlough scheme, to introduce the replacement of the furlough scheme. So we have been working. I have like weekly meetings with the TUC to discuss these issues, really. So I think now that the report is out there, now it's our job to sort of make sure policymakers, politicians, MPs, campaigners, think tanks, they know about this report, because all the sort of responses to these questions are there. They are, it's a report that gives you pretty much the solution to a lot of problems. So I think our role now as a commission is to basically carry on with the campaign, with a follow-up campaign of this report, and making sure the message, making sure we convince those that are not very convinced yet, and that's sometimes the problem we face, because when we're talking to CBI members, they know these things already. They are on the same page. So I think for us as the CBI, the challenge is to reach out to other businesses that are not part of the CBI. If you pay a membership, you probably share the same, kind of view around these issues. You think this is the right thing to do. But actually the challenge is to go and get and to convince others, those that are not part of this sort of membership organization. So that is our challenge, and I think the Commission has a very important role to play there. So these sort of panels are very important. The work that Marion and the team have been doing to be in the papers, to be in the media, all the stuff we can do, writing to politicians, writing to your local MP, all those sort of things is important. And I always say this, it's also important to sort of make sure other countries are sort of following what the Commission has done here. And I did mention this earlier today, but in the Argentinian, I'm from Argentina, the Argentinian president has been saying, actually the last couple of presentations that he gave, that he is really looking at a caring economy for the recovery. And there is one, the women's minister is actually thinking about that, and how that sector will build or will support building the recovery in Argentina, that it's really struggling because of other economic issues. So I think the Commission has also a role there to sort of share these views more broadly. Of course, there are things that are just applicable to the UK, but actually the principles are worldwide. So we have to make sure that the people out there sort of taking these decisions abroad in other countries can read this report. I did share the report with my friends in the UN when I was working in the UN in New York. So these people are those that are deciding policies in a lot of countries. So we have to make sure that as commissioners we do that work and we campaign for a caring economy. I think there's a lot of hope. Sometimes it's difficult to see how all this is going to happen. But I think we have a key role there, and I think the fact that we enter into a second lockdown or a virtual lockdown, means that this is going to be, very difficult in the months ahead. It's going to be tougher. So actually, this report lands at a very unique moment. And I guess the fact that a lot of people are sort of thinking the same, that I think that's the main thing, because actually you have a lot of people saying, yeah, I agree with these ideas. These are good ideas. And those are the ones that then decide the parliament, who the politicians are. So I guess that is crucial as well, sort of making sure we build momentum behind those numbers and really sort of amplify the message, raise awareness, and use these platforms. The CBI is a big platform to share these ideas with members, and they are asking these sort of things. Now we and I finish with this bit. We're starting a project about flexible working because we're getting that questions from members all the time. How do I manage people that are working from home? They are struggling, they don't see people, they don't go into the office. Can you give me some advice here? How do I assess how they work? How can I assist them in their mental health, stuff? So I think that the CBI has a great role to play here. And this report gives us all those tools, kind of support businesses to think outside the box in rebuilding the economy and rebuilding the nation after this crisis. So yeah, very pleased with the report. I'm very happy to answer any question.
Brilliant, thank you, Jenya. That was really interesting and good to have a different perspective as well. So I'll just dive straight into the question. So we've got a question from Max Hyde, goes by the pronoun she, her. Max says, in these COVID-19 times, where important decisions are being made now by the government in the name of medical advice and the economy as defined in current terms, how do we influence those decisions so that they include the experience of women? And since everyone's finished on time and we've got a bit of time, I'll throw that question to whoever wants to take it. We start with Marion.
I can say something on that. Yeah, I think this is really cuts to the heart of it, doesn't it? How can we make the most of this moment that we're in, which was completely unexpected when we set up the commission? We never thought that we'd be writing this, framing the report in the way in which it did turn out to be framed, which is in the midst of a global pandemic where suddenly people have realised the importance of care work. They've realised that, these workers which were previously branded unskilled, low skilled, are actually the backbone of the economy and completely central to it. And I think that this is a kind of unique opportunity to build on that awareness that has come into the mainstream over the last few months. And I think that there has been not only an increased appreciation of care, but also an increased awareness of who's been bearing the brunt of this lockdown and who has been worst affected. And I think I would say that general perceptions of inequality have increased over the lockdown period, over the period of the pandemic. And I think in terms of influencing, I think we've got to draw on those lessons which are very new, and a kind of a wake-up call for people. Looking at the numbers of people who were applying for social security support who would never have considered that would be even an option for them. That's a real it's a shift in kind of public awareness and attitudes, I think, and that's something that we really need to make the most of. I also think a key point of influence is drawing on that polling data which I showed, which particularly it wasn't on that slide, but it was really interesting to look at some of the issues that were polled on according to voting intention and looking at political party support. And it was really surprising to see that there's a lot of support, particularly in the Red Wall area, or the former Red Wall area at least, support for these measures. So I think that's really inspiring as well to see cross-party support for this. And even in the endorsements that we received for the report, they were also cross-party. We had endorsements from Conservative MPs, Labour MPs, Green, SNP. And all of those MPs were calling on the government to heed the recommendations of the report. So I think there is, there is kind of visible public and political support for this, which I think we can use to our advantage to push this. And the last thing I'll just say on that is about we called the report a call to action because it is, we wanted to speak to everybody in different levels. We wanted to speak to the UK government, national governments, businesses, civil society organisations, activists and allies in other countries, as Eugenia was saying as well. And I think that particularly in the UK context, we're hearing a lot at the moment about local government and regional differences as well as national differences within the UK. And I think there's a lot of potential at the moment to make the most of lobbying those local representatives, devolved governments, as well as Westminster. So I would say, yeah, definitely this is a time to really to make the most of that as well, and get pushing the message out to the different levels of government which do represent us.
Thanks,
yeah, let me just, I absolutely completely agree with everything Marion says, and I think it's very important to sort of come up from under, and often governments are much more influenced by lateral currents of thinking than they are by, you know, something coming down from on top. So we have to use every means at our disposal, and it's certainly encouraging that there are Conservative MPs as well as others who are giving us their full support and showing an interest. I think what slightly worries me at the moment is the polarisation between the economy and the health of the nation. That's wrong. It shouldn't be polarised. The two things are absolutely integral to each other, and I slightly worry about the Chancellor talking constantly about the way to revive the economy is through making money, through selling things and making things. And it's all that kind of traditional approach to how the economy is going to become buoyant again. And I think we need to make sure that we feed into all that the whole time, even if we repeat ourselves, that it's not just about that anymore. It never was, but it certainly isn't now. And that the fragility of the economy actually has been exposed. If people aren't able to go in and work looking after vulnerable people, looking after young people who get sick, looking after children and so on, it's no good having everything geared up for more production and more money making. It's just not going to happen now. And until the government at senior level accepts that tied into all this is the whole issue of the conditions under which people are working in some of these sectors, and remuneration and all those issues, and valuing these jobs in ways that are understood, we are in danger of the whole thing just falling back into the bad old ways again. So it sounds like a long, relentless slog, but I think it is going to be one, but there will be rewards at the end of it. And I think the more we can get good people to go out there and speak about these things, think tanks, regulatory bodies, we've got to think imaginatively and look at what it is that influences a government. It's not always obvious, but there are all sorts of factors and organisations that have traction in ways that we don't necessarily immediately recognise. I mean, I have been, on another sort of issue, I have been encouraged by organisations like the Equality and Human Rights Commission picking up by doing survey work on some of these important areas that are being marginalised and shouldn't be, and bringing those things to the fore. And doing the work that they do very well, which is sort of penetrating into society and saying, well, we've seen exactly what's happening. You know, when people in the care sector are not being properly appreciated and rewarded. And, you know, here are some examples of how this has had a particular impact on disabled people, on, you know, whoever. They're very good at doing all that. So I think we need to partner up with organisations like that that are ready and willing and able and experienced at shining lights into places that others may not necessarily see. But I'm on the optimistic side. I do think, exactly as you're saying, Marion, this has presented us with I have to be terribly careful not to use that phrase that's been thrown back at a certain Labour Party spokesperson, but there's good in everything, I think, and there are opportunities now which there might not have been before, but they're limited. It's like, you know, the sun coming out briefly in the middle of a stormy period. You can see where this is going to lend weight to what we've been saying, but we've got to be careful how we use that and judge it carefully. But I do think there are opportunities here, and let's seize them, and let's just keep on doing it and get every single organisation, large, small, local, national, behind us as we can, because I think we're on the right side, and I think we're being very persuasive at the moment. So it's a sort of big thumbs up, but a lot of hard work to do.
Jenny.
No, I was going to say back to the question, and how do we sort of influence government's decision and make sure the experience of women are included. I remember when the furlough scheme was being discussed back in March, you may remember there was a period when guidance wasn't clear and wasn't, the furlough scheme wasn't covering women that were sort of out of work because of caring responsibilities. So I remember sort of talking to the Treasury about that, and actually then they sort of published the guidance and make sure it was for parents with childcare responsibilities unable to work that were eligible for furlough scheme. It wasn't that way at the beginning. And we were like, we were talking to our members and they were like, I have an issue here because people cannot work because they doing homeschooling, they looking after the kids and stuff, but I cannot put them on furlough because they're not eligible. So we lobby for that, and actually they sort of include that in the furlough scheme. And then, we still saw a lot of, and there are a lot of figures from the TUC, showing that pregnant women and new mothers have been fired because of this, and there might be cases of those. But actually, we did a lot of work with the Treasury to include that because it was very unfair. So I guess, we have an important role, and we're always thinking about that when we sort of lobbying for these sort of policies, like so same with the gender pay gap reporting. It has been paused because of the crisis. So the government decided, okay, for 2020, businesses don't have to report the gender pay gap figure. They will do that in the future once they announce the legislation being resumed. And we've been asking the government for 3 months now that they have to resume that legislation. The businesses have to report the gender pay gap. They're still trying to survive, a lot of businesses, that is true, but they have to report this. This is important, and this has to be a top issue for them in this crisis. So, we always kind of having that kind of gender lens into our lobby as well, and we can drive change by doing so, and thinking about women and childcare responsibilities as well there.
So I guess just following on from that point about what you're saying about the need to kind of continue to remind government of its responsibilities, for example, around the gender pay gap. My question for the panel is, how do we ensure that this conversation, this moment that we're in, is not short-lived, and that we don't revert to business as usual in the coming months and years, as hopefully the pandemic kind of settles and the focus maybe returns to Brexit and things like that? How do we ensure that we still keep having this hopeful conversation about rethinking the economy and looking at certain professions like care workers in different ways? And how do we remind people of this time and the importance of being open to new ideas? So it sounds quite vague, but I guess my worry is that there'll be all this excitement, and then once the economy picks up, then this will all be forgotten and it will be kind of put on the shelf of dreams.
I hope it's not going to be so easy to forget. I know that sounds awful and people's instinct is to move on and be optimistic, but yeah. I do think this time we really have hit some, open goals. And one thing that really keeps on coming through is that people have widened their definition of who a sort of hero or heroine worker is. There was always this, it's not a myth at all, they're wonderful nurses, but there was always this list, wasn't there, of professions and jobs that were popular with the public and respected. So usually, hopefully, teaching, nursing, and all those sorts of things. But I think the sort of general chat that's been going on, as it were, on TV shows, Question Time, and all that sort of thing, is how actually people suddenly realise they're absolutely entirely reliant on the supply of food into shops, the people who sell the food, the people who package the food, the people who prepare the food. And they're suddenly realising that you don't just sort of, if you've got enough money, go into a shop and lots of food goes into your basket. The whole thing is just the end of a long chain of lots of people doing all sorts of different jobs. And people are beginning to ask questions about the conditions under which people are working on farms, what's happening in warehouses, what happens with food packaging, who is it that makes sure food is safe to eat. So people are beginning to take much more interest in sort of holistic approach to production and things like that. And I think that's a really good thing. And maybe we or somebody should think of commissioning kind of documentaries or films more on how, I don't know, a potato gets from being in the ground to being in a bag of chips that you buy in the supermarket, and how the medicine that you take has had to go through, quite rightly, a rigorous process of testing. It's only produced in accredited laboratories where certain standards are absolutely guaranteed. All those kind of things which have been ignored or taken for granted for far too long. But lots and lots and lots of parts of those chains involve large concentrations of women at work, often large groups of part-time women. And I think we need to be saying, look, these are the people who are doing all this, but in with all that are people's other lives. People tend to forget one goes to work and does the job, but everyone is far more than just the job that they do. So you go into work, you're a parent, you're a carer for an elderly person, and all that stuff has to be properly factored into the way in which you do your job, so that we treat the whole thing together. And caring for people, looking after relatives, providing decent care in residential settings and all the rest of it is all woven into how you go to work, how you do your job, and what your employer can, you know, reasonably expect from you. That's what I think we need to be knitting all this stuff together and letting people sort of see for themselves, even more than they are now because of the pandemic, how everything happens and what brings things from one place to another. I'm not expressing this at all well, but hopefully people will get my drift on that.
You know, you did express it really well. Actually, that was really eloquent and well put. And I think that's one of the good things about the report, actually, is the way it is so holistic, and it does bring lots of different things together. So it's one of the rare pieces of work that actually thinks about the environment and anti-racism and gender equality, and how you need all of these things in order to achieve the individual parts. So I guess another question based around that is, how do we make sure all those different groups are working together and perhaps pick up the report and see it and start to think of it as integral to their work? So, for example, environmentalists, have you had buy-in from them? Will they pick it up and think, oh, you know, a caring economy is an important part of the arguments we need to make around climate change?
Can I come in on that, Rebecca? And also, can I just say two things about the previous question about how to make sure that it's not forgotten? I just think one example, just building on what Sarah said, is about flexible working and working from home, which Eugenia was also talking about earlier, and how, you know, some companies have said, well, this will be it, you know, forever. We're closing the office. We're not going back. And I think that's a kind of example of how changes that have had to take place this year are actually not going to go back. You know, we've seen that kind of example already. And I think also on a kind of more kind of abstract level, we've seen, you know, all of these signs that people put up, thank you NHS, thank you carers, thank you post deliverers, all of those haven't been taken down, you know. And I know obviously we're nowhere near coming out of the peak, but we did have a lull and we did have a kind of, you know, some sort of normality, but those stayed up. And I just think it's one of those things, not that those posters will stay up forever, but the fact that they were made and they were put up and they've been kept up for this whole time, those kinds of things, just the way that that change how you walk around the street and what you see and who is kind of publicly lauded in that way. I do think those kinds of things are hard to move on from, you know, that kind of thing. And I totally agree with you, Rebecca, that people will want to put this behind them because of all the terrible things that it has caused. But I think things like that, which are about a change of mentality, I think will stick, and I hope they do stick. And then just on your question there, Rebecca, about alliances, we were really pleased to see that Build Back Better, which is this collection of kind of various progressive organisations whose name has now been taken on by the Prime Minister, but they put out a reaction, a kind of, you know, messaging document earlier this week, must have been, I think, when the Prime Minister made his speech at Tory Party conference. And some of the key messaging in there was, it was lifted from the work of the Women's Budget Group, specifically around care, as care jobs being green jobs. And that was really positive to see, because that was one of the kind of key ways that we wanted to influence not only policymakers directly, but also the sector, and to kind of demonstrate that you know, the importance of including a gender lens in a lot of progressive advocacy work which is being done, and particularly the climate movement as well. So we were really pleased to see that. So I think that's kind of evidence of hopefully a new direction where we can work more closely with those kinds of organisations, and we can, you know, we can amplify each other's messages and ensure that yeah, we are, you know, we're in many cases we're pushing for the same thing, and we just need to make sure that it's that different groups are equally represented.
Thank you. Sarah and Eugenia, did you want to add any final thoughts before I hand back over to Janet?
No, I was going to say that, yeah, I agree with Sarah and Marion. And I don't know, I think just like more like a personal reflection, but, you know, I talk to my friends, you know, I'm 33 and we don't want to go back to what things were before, you know, that kind of thing about generations kind of thinking, okay, this wasn't right. Health systems were not ready to cope with this. There was no investment on this. There was no money for doctors, for nurses, care unit, you know, so all this was kind of happening. And, you know, a lot of us saw that, but anyway, no one was expecting a pandemic. But I suppose, you know, the impact of the crisis is going to be big on young workers, young people. And we are thinking, okay, how is life going to be after this? We don't have to go to an office. There has to be some sort of balance between our sort of lives and work. You know, I think there's more like kind of awareness from people. So I think it's going to be very difficult to kind of go back to where things were before, actually.
I think that the TUC and the CBI and perhaps one or two of the other business organisations and maybe public sector organisations ought to put their thoughts into holding some kind of big national event with some sort of local spin-off events and saying, let's seize the moment, let's discuss this. Because I think, Eugenia, you're quite right. There are, especially, you know, younger, like you, far more younger than me, people who think, well, actually, I want to be hopeful. I want things to be better. I want things to be different. And I think if our organisations can facilitate some sort of movement, you know, some sort of big discussion about how we do. We won't agree on some things, that's inevitable, but I do think there's enough common ground there for us to seize this as an initiative. And I'm doing something at the TUC on Monday, and I'm certainly going to suggest that the TUC and the CBI have got this newfound lovely partnership with government to an extent, and without getting all romantic and, you know, hazy-eyed about it, I do think there's potential there for some joint working on all these sort of common ground areas built on what we've just done with the Commission, I would hope.
Yeah, no, and actually, look, that is happening already. I have my catch up with Sue from the TUC every Friday morning. You know, we do discuss these things. Yeah, and we always kind of on the same page. We do in our annual conference beginning of November, and Francis from the TUC, the Secretary General from the TUC, will be there talking to Caroline, and there was going to be an interview there to discuss social mobility in the UK and how we build a better country after this crisis. So I would share that with you, because the program is about social mobility, how to build a better society, and it's like 3 days discussing that, as opposed to other things that we used to discuss in the past. It's just about that 3 days. So yeah, hopefully we get there.
Excellent.
Thank you. That's a really hopeful note to end on. Thanks so much to our panelists, and that was a really enlightening, interesting discussion. And there are lots more discussions around the report coming up over the next few weeks. If you want to find out about them and join, you sign up to the newsletter, is that right, Marion? Or follow the hashtag on Twitter, WBG Commission, or one word. And then you can find out and get involved in some of those discussions. And there will be very specific discussions about different aspects of the report. So I'll hand back over to Janet, but thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And that was great. And I love the idea that we are at a moment where we can start to shift things. There's nothing like a crisis to give us an opportunity to go in and start to change the narrative. So that is very encouraging. So huge thanks to the panel for a great discussion. Special thanks to Rebecca for agreeing to chair for us. We really appreciate it. And I also want to say before we go, a final thank you to everyone who's contributed today, particularly Hannah, who organised the tech for us, which we're so dependent on now, and everything ran really smoothly. So thank you, Hannah, from behind the scenes. And finally, thanks to all of you for the contributions you've made to our work during the year. Some of you are management committee members, some of you are on our policy action group, some of you are members who are supporting us in your day-to-day work. And we can't do this job without you. We can't be what we are without that great bedrock of support. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.